And welcome back to a Standard Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jono, and as always, my co-host Chris is here with me. Today, we're going to be talking about the AFC North, continuing our divisional previews for the NFL leading up to the season. Before we jump into any content, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification button so you get all the news and notes from us on our daily and weekly drops. That being said, speaking of news and notes, we got a couple things I want to highlight today on July 29th. As of 11:41 a.m., we have Dalvin Cook this weekend meeting with the New York Jets. Sounds promising. Sounds like he could possibly be a New York Jet. Give me a 1-minute thought being a Jets fan. What do you feel about this?
I like the move. I mean, it adds depth to the running back position. Everyone was high on Breece Hall. I love Breece Hall. I think he's going to be a stud for years to come. But you have two legitimate weapons back there. Dalvin Cook still has a lot left in the tank. We've talked about it before. And I think he wants to go ring chasing and he wants to play with Aaron Rodgers. It's a guy that played against him for his entire career in Minnesota. And so he knows the kind of caliber of a player that Rodgers is and the kind of competitor that he is. So for him wanting to go there, I like this because the other two teams are in the division. And I don't want Dalvin Cook to be on the Patriots and I don't want Dalvin Cook to be on Miami. So I like it for that sake. But I think this is a good addition to the backfield. I think it muddies up from a fantasy perspective the value of both him and Breece Hall. But I think two people can feed. We saw A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones do it for a couple of years now in that backfield. So, I like it.
Yeah, I do too. It does muddy it up, in my opinion. I agree with you on that. But I do like both the guys, and I would take a flyer too on Breece Hall. It just helps Breece Hall not have to rush back and be a superstar and hopefully prolong his career in New York. And the second piece of news that came out this morning is, according to sources, Zeke Elliott is visiting with the Patriots, which almost solidifies a little bit more higher chance for Dalvin to be a Jet, because that was the other team that was really trying to push for him heavily. So that could be interesting. In my opinion, I'll give a quick little shakedown. I know you're a Ramondre Stevenson owner. It does kind of hurt that a little bit, knowing that Zeke is a goal line guy, but it's Ramondre's backfield. Let's be honest. I think he's going to do the same thing he did with Damian Harris. The only thing you may see is some touchdowns sniped by Zeke and maybe some short yardage, like 3rd and 1s or like anything like that to give a little breather. But I still like Ramondre Stevenson. I'm still drafting him high in all our drafts, not our draft specifically because you own him as a keeper, but yeah, that's it on that. We'll keep you up to date. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter as well. Our handles are down here right below us. We will update and feed you guys all the current news and updates as things happen. That being said, let's get into the AFC North. We'll start with the Baltimore Ravens. 10-7 last year. Vegas odds have them at 10.5. So they obviously like this team again, especially Lamar getting his bag. They've had a couple new additions in the wide receiver core to bolster the talent and the expectations for Lamar Jackson with Odell Beckham and Zay Flowers in the draft. Last year, they were 3rd worst in passing yardage. They were bottom of the barrel, but they were 2nd in rushing yardage and yards per carry. So this team is going to change its identity a little bit, especially with the coaching scheme that they're going to be playing a little bit faster pace, a little bit more passing heavy. So to me, I still like having a piece of this team. To me, the clearest piece of this team that I want is Lamar Jackson or Mark Andrews. Outside of that, there's still a couple question marks because you'll see as we go through and we read out the ADPs, a lot of you out there don't have an idea of who is going to be the number 1 wide receiver there and where you should be placing the running backs as well. So that being said, Lamar Jackson, ADP 37th overall. He is QB5 going right now. We have him just outside of our top 5 in our rankings, but
I have him at 6.
Yeah, I do too. In 2022, in 12 games that he did play prior to injury, he had 2,200 yards passing, 17 touchdowns. He had a small 6.9 yards per attempt, which is a little low for a quarterback in terms of that. It was the lowest of his career, actually. And he also had a 62.3 completion percentage, which is also pretty low. Now,
they had like a 35-year-old Deshaun Jackson on that team. Like
I was going to say, I attribute that to the wide receiver core being injured and off and on because obviously we'll talk about Rashad Bateman. He barely played. But I will say his rushing last year is where he took this team under his wing, no pun intended, with the Ravens. And he had 764 yards, 3 touchdowns. He had a 6.8 yards per carry, and which was the second highest since his MVP season. But the crazy stat to me that takes him out of my top 5 and makes me worry a little bit, which I think he should bounce back from this, is he only had 4 games last year with more than 1 touchdown. Only 4 multi-touchdown games. That includes rushing and passing. So that's a scary thought, especially in a tough division for a guy who you're looking for the quarterback position to score the most points. Yeah, obviously he can do that with his legs, but when you're not piecing together the passing game, you're not piecing together the rushing game and bouldering and snowballing those touchdowns together, you really only have 4 games where he had multi-touchdown either through the air, on the ground, or combined.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this is like, I know they brought in a lot of pieces at the receiver position to help him out this year, but that receiving core still concerns me a little bit, and here's why. You have 2 guys on the receiving core with Odell Beckham and with Rashad Bateman who are coming off of injuries that can linger. Now, Odell Beckham should be good to go. He's far enough removed from the ACL, but he's an older receiver too, and he does have some injury history with him. The same thing goes for Rashad Bateman. He's
not old.
He's not old, but he's been injured every season that he's been in the league, and he's again on the PUP list. He's expected to be there at the start of the season. At the start of training camp, he was on the did not show list, and then he came back the second day of training camp. But then they put him on the PUP list like a day after that. So, but then if you look at Zay Flowers, I think he's my favorite wide receiver on this receiving core. Especially in terms of value on where you can get him. But outside of that, I mean, you've got Nelson Aguilar, Devin Duvernay. They really don't, they're not deep there again. So they might be, again, an injury away from not having a ton of weapons around Lamar again. And even if they bring in a couple of guys like James Proche, I don't know if I even said that correctly. But they do what I do like about them in terms of pass catchers is the development of their second tight end with Blake Likely. I really like him. I mean, if anything happens to Andrews, he could be a candidate for a steal at the tight end position. We saw it in games that Andrews missed last year that Likely did step up. So they might run more 2 tight end sets. Who knows what we're going to see with kind of weapons around Lamar for the first time, and I mean, forever. I mean, since he's been in the league, there was only 1 year where he had a legitimate receiver, and that was with Marquise Brown, and they shipped him off. Lamar, my biggest concern with him is not the passing yardage. It's not the depth of target. It's can he stay healthy? Because if he stays healthy, he's going to be an elite quarterback. He'll be a top 10 quarterback easily without a problem. And all he needs to do is increase the passing volume a little bit and have some receivers to catch the ball, and he's going to be just fine. The rushing capabilities of him, he is the best running back quarterback in the league.
By far too, I think.
And he's the most dynamic. The thing that concerns me is that he's also, of all the running quarterbacks, the most fragile. You look at Josh Allen, you look at Justin Fields, you look at Jalen Hurts. They're thicker guys. They're bigger guys. And Lamar, as explosive as he is and dynamic as he is, he's not a thick guy, and he takes a lot of hits. Like he doesn't avoid. He wants to make people miss, and he wants to go for the big play, and so he takes a hit doing so. It's very similar to Josh Allen, except Lamar Jackson is half the size of Josh Allen.
Yeah, and Lamar's not going to lower his shoulder like Josh Allen and initiate contact. He's going to get contact, but he's not initiating that way. I mean, here's the thing, and I agree with you that with the receivers, and we'll jump into those guys before we go to the running backs. But with Lamar Jackson, to me, he had 2,200 yards passing last year on 12 games. It's not shabby. I mean, like, he could have, in theory, finished off with another 1,000 yards had he played 5 more games. If he's averaging, obviously like 200 yards a game, which is doable for him. So you put that 3,000 yards passing. Well, he had more rushing yardage than Jalen Hurts in 12 games, and Jalen Hurts played what, 16 total games. So they think he
15,
missed the last game of the season.
two games, last 2 games.
2 games. So yeah. So I think
3 games.
Okay. So yeah, he had a couple games less than Hurts, but I mean, there's no reason why he couldn't have been done what Justin Fields did, and obviously had better fantasy value than Hurts. The only difference is the touchdowns. I mean, Hurts has 2 wide receivers to throw to, and Lamar Jackson finally does have 2 to throw to. However, the 2 that Hurts gets to throw to are a little bit more durable. And so I agree with you. And talking
Well,
about the
wide
receivers,
receiver ones too.
yeah.
Like,
And you look at
I don't think that the Baltimore has a wide receiver 1.
No, they don't. They have weapons and they have talent.
weapons.
Somebody's going to emerge. Somebody's going to
Yeah.
emerge. I mean, Odell Beckham, he's going 116th overall, wide receiver 48. That's a value. That's a guy you could take a chance on, because look what he did at the end of 2021 with the Rams. He had a fantastic. He was targeting the end zone a lot too as well. It brought a lot of pressure off of Cooper Kupp and Matt Stafford, and it helped them, win the championship ultimately. And had he not tore his ACL in the Super Bowl, I think he would have, could have been up there for the MVP of the Super Bowl, because he was on fire before he tore it. So looking at all that stuff there, I think he's going to be fine. I think he's going to be great. He even came out and said that he's feeling like this may be his final year in the NFL. So, he's going to try and go out with a bang for as flashy of a guy as he is. I think he's going to try and do what he can. When you talk about Rashad Bateman, who's going 122 overall as wide receiver 51, his problem is staying healthy with that foot and that lower body. And he is a great receiver when healthy. I mean, he had 15 receptions for 285 yards. He had a 10.1 yards per target, and he had a 19 yards per reception average last year and 2 touchdowns, but he was barely on the field. And he did have one top 10 finish where he went 4 receptions for 108 and a touchdown. So that's what you can get out of him. And the fact that he's going after Odell Beckham Jr. that low at wide receiver 51, I like that. You can take a shot on it. Pretty much, to me, the way I'm looking at this Baltimore wide receiver core is I'm going to go after one of them, because one of them may hit, and you got to hope it's that one. To me, we talk about it, we'd like Zay Flowers, 124th overall, wide receiver 50. He's the cheapest. He's actually one ahead of Rashad Bateman. They're neck and neck. But he is coming in camp, all the talk about him being the clear number 1 wide receiver in Baltimore, that he is just, I think they nickname him Joystick, and he's taking Joystick. So that tells you a lot of the type of receiver. We knew that coming out of college. He's the guy I'm going to take a chance on. But if somebody wants to jump ADP to grab Zay Flowers, I'm fine going with Rashad Bateman for the upside, or Odell Beckham. Like, these guys are going to sit on my bench and be a flex role during bye weeks. But if one of them hits, then all of a sudden you got yourself a wide receiver 2. I don't think any of them is going to give you wide receiver 1 numbers.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the 4,000-yard passing season MVP year from Lamar Jackson, right? So if we think if he stays healthy, if one of these guys hits, I mean, it could be a league winner because of the value that you're getting them, because you're all getting them at value. Like, you're not having to waste a top 6 round pick on them. So you can go and get them in the 8th round, 9th round, 10th round for some of them, and fine. Like, if that's where you're going to get a guy that could potentially emerge as the star. Again, we don't know who it's going to be. We don't know what his rapport is going to be like with Odell Beckham. We don't know what his rapport is going to be like with Zay Flowers. And even with all the reports coming out of camp, Rashad Bateman was expected to be the number 1 there, and now it looks like Zay Flowers might be the number 1 there. Either way, I think that this is going to be their value is where it should be, because there's so much uncertainty, right? There's
Lamar.
Yeah, there's so much uncertainty with him. And the truth is, this team wants to run the football, and they have weapons now on the outside to make teams have to respect them in the passing game. But Lamar's also got to do it. Lamar's got to put the ball on the money. Lamar has all it. We've seen it from him before. but if he
It
doesn't
was
stay healthy,
3,100 yards, by the way, not 4,000 passing. It was
okay.
3,100.
So sorry,
It was
my bad.
4,000 total. No, it's all right.
Um,
But I agree with you. I mean, here's the crazy part to me though, that gives me a little bit of confidence in someone like Odell Beckham Jr. If you look at his track record when he's moved from team, when he goes from the Giants to the Browns, and so on, he's done a fantastic job of being a trustworthy wide receiver for either quarterback, like any of them that he's had. Now, outside of Eli Manning, has he really had anybody, until Matt Stafford throwing him the ball? I mean, Baker Mayfield. But again, he's been a reliable receiver, but health has always been the concern with him. He just can't stay healthy year after year.
yeah, I mean,
But
I know you're a Giant fan, and I know you loved him. I've never been a believer that Odell Beckham is a top 10 receiver in the league
I'm not
at
saying he's a top end
any
receiver.
point in
I'm
his
just
career.
saying I'm calling reliable. I'm saying reliable.
I don't even think that. Like, he's had so many drops. I mean, people want, like, this is the thing with the Browns. When he was on the Browns with Baker Mayfield, he had a ton of drops that year, and then he turns around and runs his mouth about, his dad runs his mouth about Baker Mayfield, and about how Baker needs to get him the ball. It's like, you need to catch the ball that actually comes to you. So I don't know. Like, I think he's a talent here. I think he's a great secondary option on a team, which is why I think he fits in here well, because of Zay Flowers or Bateman or the other guys. I think Odell Beckham is still a dynamic playmaker. I mean, we've seen the kind of catches he can make. He can make the outstanding catches. He's super athletic, and he has explosive ability. The home run ability. So I've never been a big believer in Odell Beckham, though. And I think I would probably avoid him this year. And like, I would rather have Flowers over him.
Yeah, I
I'd
would
probably
too. I
have
think so. I would.
I probably would go Odell over Bateman, depending
Yep.
on at this point as of today. If Bateman comes back, off the pup list and gets some training camp in and looks healthy, looks like he's going to run, I'd probably go towards Bateman a little bit more. But there's no one other than Flowers. There's no one here that really excites me about being like, I want this guy on my team. It's kind of like we don't know who's going to emerge as the number one there. And here's the other question I'll ask you is, do you think that, that now that they have a couple weapons there and Mark Andrews is going to get his, do you think that Lamar can hold up 2,000-yard receivers?
I don't think there's going to be 2,000 yards. I don't think there's going to be 1,000-yard receiver on this team. That's my thought process. Is like,
Do you think
I
Andrews
think
around 800, 900?
I think Andrews around 900. I think he could close to 1,000. I think you have another receiver at 900, another receiver at 800, and another receiver, pushing maybe 800 as well. Like, I think that's what you're going to see, because we don't know what the health of these guys are going to be like, number one. But number two, nobody is a guy that's worthy of garnering, 150 targets, on this team in the wide receiver core. Now, I mean, I will say with Odell Beckham Jr., to me, 2019 when he left the Browns, when he left Cleveland before the injury the year before with Mayfield, he actually had a decent season. He had 133 targets, but you're right, he only had 74 receptions. And we'll talk about another receiver who's going at wide receiver 2 overall, that's got similar stat line to that. But that being said, I think Odell Beckham Jr., he once was a top 10 guy. He's no longer, I think, a top 10 guy, and I agree with you. However, I think he's the guy that I think is going to be trustworthy for Lamar Jackson. I think he's the guy that Lamar can look to outside of Mark Andrews, but Mark Andrews is the receptions leader for this team. We know that going into this, it was the same every year prior to that.
Yeah.
Before we get into Mark Andrews, let's talk about the running backs here, because to me, this is just as muddy as the wide receiver core. Because right now, J.K. Dobbins is running back 1 for this team. He's ADP 47 overall, running back 19. He's currently on the PUP list with an unspecified injury. They're also saying it could be contract related, because he's pretty much been vocal about his dismay on the contract that he has and the negotiations they've been having. You have Gus Edwards. They just recently signed Melvin Gordon as a backup option, which is nice because they've in the past had issues with these injuries to the running backs. He only J.K. played 8 games last year. He had 92 rushes for 520 yards, 2 touchdowns. He did have a 5.7 yards per carry average. He did not have a big role in the passing game whatsoever. They really don't pass much to these running backs. There's not a lot of dump offs, obviously, because Lamar can tuck and go. So to me, I'm not in love with this backfield. I don't feel like I want to touch this backfield. To me, someone like J.K. Dobbins or Gus Edwards, J.K. would probably be a flex play for me. Gus Edwards would probably end up being a bench stash for me if anything happened to J.K. Dobbins. But I'm not looking to acquire a running back out of this backfield. If I'm looking to acquire somebody with the running potential in this backfield, it's Lamar Jackson at quarterback. Plain and simple.
I don't know. I think the value you can get J.K. Dobbins for is a nice piece to add. Like again, like
fourth round, we're talking there.
If you're already drafting, 1 or 2 running backs up top, and he's there in the 4th round, I mean, that when he comes in, like we've seen what running backs can do in this backfield, and we've seen when J.K. Dobbins has been healthy, what kind of runner he is. Now, I agree with you. I think that he's the only one there that I think garnishes, any kind of value. But Gus Edwards is another interesting guy that you can probably get really, really late in the draft. And again, if anything were to happen to J.K. Dobbins, I mean, the year that everyone was hurt there, you had both Devonta Freeman and Latavius Murray be extremely, extremely serviceable from a fantasy perspective, especially in standard. I mean, not so much in PPR, but especially in standard, because they were guaranteed a touchdown and like 40 yards. So 10 points. And from a flex play, or if you're running a hero running back and you have just one stud, having a guy like that as your RB2, and if you're stacked at receiver, like you just want consistency, right? Do you have any interest in Melvin Gordon?
Again, like I could possibly no, because he's a waiver guy for me. Like I'm not going to go grab him because it wasn't like he showed any sort of flash of his younger self in Denver. Like there's a reason Denver didn't hold on to him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And obviously they didn't want to pay him either. But I just again, you talked about Devonta Freeman in Baltimore in 2021. He ended up having a 4.3 yards per carry. He had 500 yards. He ended up playing, I think, 16 total games with them and ended up with 5 touchdowns. He was, quote unquote, serviceable. But again, it's there's other people. Let me give you this. J.K. Dobbins, 4th round, 47 overall. Let me give you the other 4th round options. And one guy who's on the turn, 4-5 turn. Would you take Aaron Jones over him?
Yes.
Would you take Joe Mixon over him?
Yes.
Dameon Pierce?
That's close. I think I would still have to go with Pierce.
I would go with Pierce. And then how about Miles Sanders?
Miles Sanders, yeah.
Yeah, and Miles Sanders is on is 2 picks later on the 5 turn. So that's what I'm saying. Is like where you can get J.K. Dobbins seems like a value until you look at the running backs around him. And then you start to because Cam Akers is a whole nother 10 picks later on him. DeAndre Swift, Rashad White, James Conner is a whole 20 picks after him. I just don't like where it is. Like, yes, I agree. This is a good rushing offense and always has been. But I don't want to put my faith in the 4th round pick in J.K. Dobbins when I can get James Conner in the 6th round. Or I can get Cam Akers in the end of the 5th round. And know that I can get a wide receiver instead or a tight end in that 6th round with much more value. I mean, you're talking in, 4th round, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf at the end of the 3rd. There's other guys there.
I mean, you're right. Like I'm not going to be the one to go and overdraft on him. I think that people are going to see him there and just take the risk because the reward is there. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like both of us are kind of saying, yeah, the 4th round is a little too high. But if you really do think about it, like if he's healthy and if he stays healthy, he will be a 4th round pick, if not higher. At end of season, he has that kind of talent and he's in the right offense for it. And so the reward is there. He has a lot. So all those other guys you listed, he has more upside than any of them, for sure. And he's in a better offense than any of them. Even if he loses rushing touchdowns to Lamar Jackson. So that's where I see like
and
the value.
I was just mentioning too the running backs on top of that. I agree with you. Like he had his ceiling could be high,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
which
and
is
I'm
why his
saying
value is where it is.
with the running backs that you mentioned. I mean, like I think he has a higher ceiling than Aaron Jones. But the question is he going to stay healthy? It's the same reason Lamar Jackson is dropping down in drafts too. It's like we're this team. They might need a new strength and conditioning coach. John, you should apply because
Those days are over for me.
yeah. What a waste of a Masters, right? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I mean,
I'm kidding.
yeah,
I'm kidding.
it was free.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it was free.
Take it.
Yeah, exactly. I am taking it.
No education is wasted, ladies and gentlemen, especially you young folks. Stay in school. But yeah, I mean, like this is the issue with this team, and we've seen it year in year out, where there's like major injuries to key positions, and it's every year. Whether it's wide receiver, whether it's running back, whether it's quarterback, this offense just can't stay healthy for some reason. Maybe it's the turf. I mean, people complain about MetLife, but like maybe it's the turf there.
Well, you're not seeing a ton of ACL issues
No.
there, except for J.K. Dobbins, which was a contact-related ACL. When you watch the replay, if you've got a solid steel stomach, go ahead watch his injury back in that preseason game. But so I don't think it's that. I just think to me, it's the fact that this team plays fast and plays hard. And when you do that, you're going to have your rolled ankles, you're going to have your sprained ankles, you're going to have things like that happen when things are moving fast and playing quick. And, when Lamar Jackson's in the backfield trying to make something out of nothing, everybody's changing directions. Everybody's doing something. And so it plays fast and it plays quick. It's not as structured as other offenses are where everybody, isn't trying to ad lib along with their quarterback. So I think that plays a role with it.
Especially with the younger guys that come into this offense in the backfield, running backs, when they come in, like these are college offenses, essentially. The RPO is what a lot of teams are doing in college. And so these kids should be ready to roll with it. This is the concern about, like, the Ravens are good. The Ravens are a really good team and everyone likes the Ravens. Vegas likes the Ravens. All the analysts like the Ravens. The question is, if they have major injuries again, we've seen Mark Andrews injured. We've seen like every receiver that's been on this team has been injured in some capacity. Every
it's the NFL too. Like, let's be honest.
I know, but
it's the NFL.
I know, but you look at other teams and they're not suffering the amount of injuries. And this is like, I know you don't draft for based on like injury prediction, but this is a team where it's a struggle to say, oh, I really love these guys, because they've had 2-3 years of significantly missed time.
Yeah. Well, let's move on from the Ravens real quick. Before we do, we got to mention Mark Andrews, tight end 5 last year, 73 catches for 847 and 5 touchdowns. He had a down year from his tight end 1 overall season the year before. That also, don't forget, he missed 2 games last year, plus missed a Lamar Jackson during the season as well. But either way, I still have him. He's going to finish top 5 again. So he's the only other one with the potential that I think could finish 1 overall next to Kels. Outside of that, I just want to mention with J.K. Dobbins and the value there. The one thing I was going to say is here's 3 players that are in that right around him in that overall 4th round. Is you got Justin Fields, Justin Herbert, T.J. Hawkinson. So you could just see, like, do you go with J.K. Dobbins or do you go with one of the top 5, 6, 7 quarterbacks or one of the top 4 tight ends? That's what you're looking at right there. It just depends on what you do beforehand, but I'm leaning towards one of these other guys before I go with Dobbins. So finish up what you got to say, and then we're going to move on to the Steelers.
Yeah, I just want to say, if you're in a dynasty league, draft Blake Likely. I think that he can be a huge piece in a year or two in this offense. So if you're in a dynasty or a keeper league and you have a late round pick to kind of throw around, we've seen the tight end position be heavily used by the Baltimore Ravens and by Lamar Jackson, and Blake Likely is a super athlete. So, just want to keep him on people's radar, especially if something happens to Andrews this year. He should be an immediate waiver wire add if you are an Andrews owner. And that's it. Let's move on.
All right, moving on to the Steelers. 9-8 last year. Vegas has them at 8.5. They were 24th in passing, 16th in rushing. I think 8.5 is a tall order for them in this division. They didn't do enough at the end of the season to prove that this team is anything that they, in terms of competitive in the division, but they did have a winning record. Save Tomlin, which is huge. I think Kenny Pickett's going to be better. He's ADP 168 overall. He's QB 20. I think that's accurate and where he should be because he finished 28th overall last year. He can improve upon that, but he's not going to make leaps and bounds to get himself in the top 10. He's
the worst
however,
quarterback in this division, and he is going to be the worst quarterback in the division.
But that being said, they're probably going to be, I mean, they have a good defense. Steelers always do, but they're playing from behind at times. But let's just say this. What surprised me about Kenny Pickett, he had 55 rushing attempts last year, 237 yards and 3 touchdowns. The guy ran a lot at Pitt. I expect him to continue to use those legs. It's not obviously going to be like Lamar Jackson, but that being said, 55 attempts is a lot. So that's something to keep an eye on. I'm not looking to draft him. I'm not even looking to stash him. I'm not even looking at him in Dynasty. I haven't seen enough from him to prove it to me. But Najee Harris is somebody who's always had this polarizing thought process on him year after year, and everybody wants to dirt on him, and yet then he finishes still top 12. So he's 27th overall, RB 12. He finished 12 last year, 14 in PPR. That's mostly due to the down turn in the passing game where his targets and his receptions were pretty much almost cut in half. But the biggest number is he only has a 3.82 yards per carry last year. He's never been over 4 in the 2 seasons that he's been here. And that's the part that I don't like about him. That's why it's hard for me to have him inside my top 12 if you're not producing good rushing attempts, rush after rush after rush. I mean, they didn't have a good offensive line last year. He probably was, I got to break down the numbers a little bit more, but if I'm correct, his yards before contact is pretty low, and his yards after contact is where he made his money, which is a good thing. However, when you're getting hit behind the line of scrimmage, that doesn't help anybody. So
I mean, the concerning thing about Najee is that, yeah, he's going to get the volume, and you draft him because he's going to get the volume, but he does not break off big plays. I think of all the starting running backs in the league, he has the lowest 20+ yard rushes. I think he had under 3 last year of 20+ yard rushes. That's low. That's low for a guy that's going to touch the ball 400 times. You look at and this is why there's a lot of hype around Jaylen Warren this year, is that they're going to kind of spare, Najee a little bit and give Jaylen Warren more volume, and he's shown that he can be productive with the ball. But I kind of said this a month or 2 ago. We did the offenses that were avoided, and this was one of them. And it's not because they don't have talent. They have a lot of talent on this team. This is one of the more talented offenses. But this is kind of your thoughts on the Baltimore Ravens. It's just a lot of mediocrity across the board. And I don't see a 1,000-yard receiver from this team, even though they have 3 very talented receivers. I don't see a ton of touchdowns. And I know there's been a lot of offseason, the hype train. People are trying to get it around Kenny Pickett. Look how he finished the season. He was efficient. He only threw 5 touchdowns in the last 7 games. He
didn't have a very good end of the season. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's his numbers, he became more efficient because he stopped turning the ball over and he started learning the offense a little better. And I think year 2, he's going to have a little bit more of a veteran mindset coming into the season. And they have the weapons around him. I just don't see this offense. The Steelers offense has always been, I don't care who gets the ball, other than when they had Antonio Brown, where it's just heavy volume. But even look at the years that Plax was there and Martavis Bryant was there, they just relied on big plays to be able to sustain their fantasy numbers. So that being said, maybe Pickens is probably the best option at receiver this year because that's all he does is make big plays. It still doesn't make me fall in love with him. Like Deontay Johnson, he He was
Well,
had a
we'll
heat
get to the
related illness.
receivers in a second. Let's finish up with Najee and Warren. I mean, here's the only thing, and I agree with you on Warren. I like Warren, and stock's going up in Warren because at a training camp, they're saying they're utilizing a lot of two-back sets, which they did a little bit last year, which puts a little more faith in Warren. I think he's the more explosive of the two guys, like you said, in terms of big plays. Najee Harris didn't have it last year. That just wasn't his game. So
Never
when I
been,
look,
even dating back to
yeah,
college.
I do take back what I said earlier. Last year, there was an inverse. Excuse me. His yards before carries was higher than the year prior, and his yards um, after contact. Sorry, yards before contact, yards after contact were lower. They were under 2. So he didn't break as many tackles as he did his rookie season, and so again, like he just doesn't have the explosiveness. And yeah, I mean, he's a good receiver at the backfield. They just didn't utilize him, and now you add another pass catcher with Allen Robinson and good tight end. I mean, I don't see him getting more out of there. I see Jalen Warren, taking into his usage a little bit too as well. So he's somebody that when you look at the ADP, he's 27th overall. He's RB12, so he's a top 12 option. But when you look at that 27th overall, you have receivers at the 31st and 29th and 30th, like Olave, Higgins, Devonta Smith. Like, is that where you want to, do you want to go with Najee Harris at the end of the beginning of the third round, or do you want to go with one of those guys? Because other than that, you're looking at ETN, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall, Ramondre Stevenson are going right before Najee,
As they should.
as they should. But unless you obviously Dalvin goes to the Jets, then I'm dropping Breece Hall heavily. But to me, I think he's in that position where the running backs are, that he may be the last one there that you can guarantee volume, but it's a volume guy with low output. I'd rather go with a wide receiver with high upside and usage, and then try and take another guy later on, like Dameon Pierce, like we talked about, or Joe Mixon or Aaron Jones, some guy who's got who could finish the same total points as he did last year, or as he does at the end of the season, just different way to do it, and has chance to have bigger games than Najee. So
Yeah, I mean, you look at the final 8 games of the season. So I know, we don't want to we don't want to split up and just take a sample size, but you look at the final 8 games of the season when Pickett really started to come into his own, and Najee actually had a productive year. So I still think he's a top 12 running back, and I really do. I really do think he deserves to be there just based on the volume. But if you look at the numbers last year, I'm just going to run down his ranks, okay, and where he finished week by week. So starting with week 10, RB20, then RB4, RB29, 23, 16, 14, 24, 6, 10. In 4 of those games, he had under 10 points, but he never had under 9 points. So he was right around that 10-point mark, and he finished the season off, I mean, not stupid strong where he was blowing up like Cam Akers was in the last couple of games, but he's finished the season.
Yeah, he had solid numbers.
So if you're drafting him as an RB2, love it. I really do. Like, he's going to get the volume. Having him as an RB2, a guy that can be consistent with some upside because of touchdown potential. I mean, the first half of the season, he only had 1 touchdown, and then he finishes the season. Sorry, he had 3 touchdowns, 2 of them receiving, so only 1 rushing. But then he had 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 touchdowns to finish the season. To finish the season off. So he finished the season off strong. And yeah, his efficiency is the biggest concern. Is he's going to get volume, but his efficiency is down. And that's okay, because like this offense is going to be decent enough where, like, yeah, they might have the big, like, again, they have big play guys like Pickens and Deontay that can get the big chunk play, and they get stopped at the 5-yard line. And who do you think they're going to throw the ball? No, they're going to just give it to Najee, and he's going to punch it in. So,
well, then RB2, Pickett did have 3 touchdowns there. I mean, I like him as an RB2 as well. You just got to make that decision on how you build it out. If you're leaning on him as your RB1, he's like one of those last guys that's going to get the volume that could give you potential RB1 numbers, but his yards per carry are going to have to go up for him to truly do that. But again, like if you go wide receiver first round, you're coming around end of the second round, and he's sitting there. Say you went Jefferson or Chase, and then you're coming around. He's a good guy to take because of the volume. He's going to give you RB1 volume numbers, and if he can get his yards per carry up, he's going to give you RB1 output as well. Let's move on to the pass catchers here. Deontay Johnson, we mentioned it, had a downturn of a year with 0 touchdowns.
One more thing on Najee. He only had 100-yard game.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's all because his yards per carry are so low. He needs the volume to get the numbers he is. So, again, that yards per carry gets up into the 4 range. You're going to see some better yardage output on a per game basis. So again, let's go to Deontay Johnson. He's 78 overall, wide receiver 33. He did not finish in the top 40 last year. He finished at 46, 30 in PPR just because of the volume there. Again, we're talking standard scoring here. He had 147 targets, which was the second highest in his 4-year span in the NFL. 86 receptions for 882, and like I said, 0 touchdowns. So here's the number that jumps out to me on him is he had a 58% catch percentage last year, which is, to me, that is a low number for him across his career. Before that, he was above 61 every single season. So that in part was due to his quarterback play, in my opinion. It wasn't all due to him. So I think with another year under the belt with Kenny Pickett, I expect Deontay to still be the wide receiver 1 here. Even if he's 1A and you want to say Pickens will be 1B, I still see him 1 based on the volume and opportunity. But to me, I like the upside of George Pickens with the fact that he finished wide receiver 31 last year. He finished 39 PPR, but 31 because he ended up having 4 touchdowns. He had 800 yards, only 80 shy of Deontay Johnson, but he did it on 34 less receptions. When you have a 15.4 yards per catch average, that's big playability for George Pickens, and I think he flashed that middle to late season. I'm going to expect a little bit more of that. Again, I don't know if anybody coming out of this receiving core is going to be a wide receiver 1 in the NFL in terms of fantasy, but to have one of these guys as your flex or wide receiver 2 option, depending upon how heavy you go on running back or quarterback and you're needing somebody. Again, Pickens going at wide receiver 35, just two behind Deontay Johnson. I like the value there. And then obviously you have Allen Robinson, who is off the chart in terms of where you can get him in your draft. He's going to be free at that point. And he finished at 86 last year. He did have a good 10.2 yards per reception, which is on par with his career. But the volume wasn't there. He wasn't used as well as they thought they were going to use him, and he just can't stay healthy either. So, which guy do you like most in this receiving core?
It's tough because I like Deontay just based on his volume, and the 0 touchdowns I think is an outlier because if he has three touchdowns, he finishes ahead of Pickens, right? So I don't know. I like Pickens. Like I said, I like Pickens because he has the big playability. He has the 15 yards per catch. He has monster hands. He's a physical guy. He's kind of, the prototypical like Steelers wide receiver, right? You think of like Hines Ward and how aggressive and physical he was. Well, Pickens is very similar in terms of how he plays the game, but he's a better pass catcher and he makes freak catches. So I like Pickens. But it's hard for me to kind of stay away from Deontay based on the volume and the fact that he doesn't need to get 8 touchdowns because he's going to get 140 targets. I mean, there's a reason even when Pickett came in and started, there's a reason that Deontay had still 140 targets, 134 targets, right? There's a reason because he's the better receiver. He gets open, and they just had poor quarterback play for the majority of the season last year. But I think this is going to be a team that's going to be around 8 or 9 wins. Their defense is going to be the catalyst to keep them in games. They're not going to go and throw up 28 points and 30 points a game. They're just not they're not built that way. And it's hard for me to love any of these receivers as well because just like the Baltimore receivers, even though I think the Steelers receiving core is much more talented than Baltimore's, like across the board. But it's just going to be mediocrity in the passing game. So I can't fall in love with them. But if I were to say who do I like at value and who would I be willing to draft, I think it'd be Pickens.
Okay. And I agree with you. I mean, when I look at the red zone targets last year,
And that's
in
why.
terms of in terms of that, Deontay Johnson did have 16 red zone targets, which puts him up there on par with like Alan Lazard, Zay Jones, Russell Gage, Amari Cooper. CeeDee Lamb only had 15 last year. AJ Brown only had 15. So, but his
0.
reception percentage was 43 and no touchdowns out of it,
0
where the rest of these guys are getting 4 to 6 touchdowns. So when you look at George Pickens and his numbers, pulling it up here, he only had 7. He only had 2 receptions, but those 2 receptions were both touchdowns. So like his reception to touchdown is 100% there. I like the odds, even though there was less last year. I like Deontay Johnson, but like I said, I think Pickens' big playability gives him the edge up on the 2 of them. And he's young and he's electric. So I think Pickens, in especially games that are going to need to rely on some big plays and some big scoring plays, is going to get the ball from Pickett more often. But again, it could be a 1A, 1B.
My concern with I don't really think it's a 1A, 1B, because if you look at other 1A, 1B situations, the split in the terms of receptions and targets isn't as much. And this is a huge split in terms of receptions and targets.
Well, I'm not talking about last year. I'm talking about going into this year. That may be different. I'm projecting it to be a little bit closer than it was last year.
I don't know. That's where I can't really get there just yet. I still think Pickens is going to be around, 80 targets, hopefully he catches more, and he's probably around 60, 65 catches on the season. But what he can do with those catches is much better. And like you said, he's a bigger target. He's big, strong hands. He's kind of when you think of a good red zone threat, he's that, right? Because he's going to go up there and win the 50-50. He's going to go and beat people in the back of the end zone and on the corner routes. So, yeah, I like Pickens more just on that. Deontay's great, and he's a volume catch play, but he's not a huge even though he's targeted in the red zone a lot. We haven't seen that from him. We didn't see it last year from him. And the biggest question why I don't like these guys is, can he pick it? Can he prove to throw more touchdowns and less interceptions and be efficient with the football and be able to lead this offense to getting around that 28 points a game mark? I mean, that's really high, but like they need to be scoring 3 touchdowns a game. So if they're around 21 points, like he's going to get, his numbers are going to go up, but they just weren't that last year. Like this offense couldn't score and couldn't move the ball.
All right, well, let's finish up with the Steelers. We'll chat real quick about Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington, even though there's not much to say about him yet. Pat Freiermuth, ADP 93 overall, tight end number 9. He's in the top 10 tight ends. I have him inside my top 10 tight ends just purely because 98 targets last year. I expect him to be somewhere around the same. I don't really care the fact that Allen Robinson's on the team. That's going to change much. 63 catches, 732. He had 11.6 yards per reception. So he's a mismatch for linebackers, which is nice to see. And the low number of 2 touchdowns is what hurts him. So it's a matter of getting more of those red zone targets and finding that there. I like Freiermuth. He's kind of in that big group of tight ends of Dalton Schultz and Goddard and all those guys kind of sitting right there. He's like, if you miss on the first 2 guys, you've got maybe 3 more chances to get somebody of high value. And then you got this big group of guys down below and the next one there before it just completely falls off, Goku, kind of all the same there. Quick technical difficulty there. Sorry. We lost stream for a second. That being said, Darnell Washington, I think, is a huge talent coming out of Georgia, as you see in my background here. But I don't see him cracking into Freiermuth too much at all. They may use him in 2 tight end sets, but he's an athletic freak. He's a huge beast. He may be somebody you want to think about stashing late in a dynasty league because who knows what his future is going to hold as a tight end there. They obviously liked him and drafted him. So that's enough to say about the Steelers. There's nothing new about Freiermuth. Nothing big that's going to pop off the page. So let's move on to the
Yeah,
Cincinnati Bengals.
Clip and insert my tight end argument here.
Yeah. Cincinnati Bengals 12-4 last year, 11.5 Vegas odds for wins. Let's see if that number changes based on the Joe Burrow injury. Currently, they have him out, quote unquote, or I should say, and I quote, several weeks, which kind of aligns to what we talked about in regards to a grade 2 strain, grade 3 strain, rather than being grade 1, which is mostly inflammation and can be a couple days to a week. So what I'd say here is keep an eye on the news there.
He was in on a scooter and on crutches, but that's normal. I don't think people should read into that. Because of what the injury is, they want to keep him off the walking foot. And, when you're walking, you need to use your calf muscle, guys. So they're keeping him off that. So I don't think it's anything to read into.
RICE, ladies and gentlemen, the acronym for what you do when you have this injury: rest, ice, compression, elevation. So that's all he could really do. There's nothing surgically you can really do for this injury, which makes why there's a longer lead time and why there's no definite there. But I don't like that it is on his plant foot or on his back foot, his launch foot for his passing. That's not great, but I digress. Let's move forward. They were 6th in passing yards last year, obviously at the head of Joe Burrow, 2nd in passing touchdowns with Joe Burrow, and they were 4th worst in rushing yardage. But they did have 14 rushing touchdowns last year. Now, Burrow did have some of those. He had 5 on the ground himself. So this is Joe Burrow's
half of those team. Came in one game against me last year.
Yeah, but this is Joe Burrow's team. His ADP 32 overall, QB4. This does not drop the needle on him at all with the injury. To me, if people in your league want to stay away from him, well, he's gonna fall into your lap. So I'm taking Joe Burrow as much as I can. I think he could build on his year of 36 touchdowns. He only increased it from 1 from his previous year. I think he can get above that. He has a chance to throw for 40 with the receiving core that he has there. They've obviously shied a little bit farther away from the running game and Joe Mixon, and gone more towards this pass-heavy game because they've also been in games where they've had to battle it out. So I expect the same thing in this division. He's going QB4. He was QB4 last year. He's going QB4 this year. I think it's going to stay the same. I like him a lot. Keep an eye on that injury there. You have anything to say about Burrow that your thoughts are before we move on to Mixon?
No, he's one of our top quarterbacks that we have ranked. I don't think this injury is serious. I don't think he's going to miss significant time. If he does, it might be a week or two, and that's precautionary and for the better because they don't want this reoccurring. Dak had this very similar injury to this a couple of years ago, and they rested him in a little bit longer to make sure, like we talked about, this is soft tissue injury in the muscle. So the chance of this reoccurring is significantly higher, and especially because it's on his plant foot. So it's something to keep your eye on because it does affect the receiving. It does affect the receivers in this on this team. But in all honesty, I think he's going to be fine, and I don't think it should affect anyone's value. We can move along to Joe Mixon because there's not much more. There's not much more to say about Joe Burrow that people don't know about. All right, he's going to be a top quarterback in this league again.
Yeah. In terms of Joe Mixon, he's ADP 39 overall. He's running back 17 off the board. So there's much more value in him this year than there was in the past because he's always been up a little bit higher in the top 12 guys. However, last year he didn't finish in the top 12. He only played 14 games last year. He did have 210 attempts for 814 yards, but he had a below a 4.0 yards per carry. He had down in 3.9 and 7 touchdowns. Those are low numbers for him from previous seasons. His health has always been up and down, and it's always, ankle, foot, calf, like minor things here and there that nag him, but he plays through a lot of stuff too as well. I still like the value that he has there in 39th overall. I think you're going to get a guy in a high-scoring offense that's going to give you running back 2 numbers, and that's what you're looking for at 39th overall at running back 17. And this goes back to our J.K. Dobbins argument a little bit earlier. Here's a guy that's right a little bit before J.K. Dobbins in that range. And it's which offense do you want to get more involved in? Which one do you like more? I trust Mixon a little bit more than Dobbins because he's done it before. And he's on an offense with Joe Burrow. Other running backs of note, anything you want to drop in here in terms of thoughts outside of Joe Mixon? I don't think they really, obviously it was Zach Evans is there.
Chase
Um,
Brown, baby.
and Chase Brown, but it doesn't seem nothing's flying out of camp yet. So keep an eye on that backfield there. But I think they've invested in Mixon. Mixon took a pay cut to be the RB1 here. He's the one who I'm trusting.
I'll say this again: dynasty and keeper leagues, draft Chase Brown. He's a guy. We kind of made this argument. I made this argument last week with Kenneth Walker and the Seattle Seahawks. This is going to be a really, really, really good offense. So you want a piece of the running back situation in this offense. So this is why I'm higher up on Joe Mixon this year than a lot of other people, because if this offense is going to be good, I mean, we saw last year he had a 5 touchdown game. I mean, the thing is he can disappear in games because Burrow can throw for 4 or 5 touchdowns. But that's a good thing because he's going to probably get a lot of late game carries and be able to pump his numbers up a little bit. His efficiency wasn't too high, but again, he's a running back in a really, really, really good offense, and this is why I like Chase Brown. Chase Brown was kind of a volume running back in college, and he comes to a team that is looking for stability at the running back position. They get rid of Samaje Perine, and Perine goes and signs with Denver. So they need a secondary back there, and especially with Joe Mixon's injury history, there is going to be a secondary option there, and I think Chase Brown is going to be that guy. So this is a guy that, very similar to what Samaje Perine was last year, could take that role. And if anything did happen to Joe Mixon, I like Chase Brown a lot. And I said this in the beginning of the season when people thought he was going to get suspended, that people should go and draft Chase Brown because any running back in this offense is going to be productive. Are they going to be RB1? No. But you could draft Chase Brown and Joe Mixon. Look at the value that you're getting from Joe Mixon this year.
Yeah, so 2 years ago, Joe Mixon was running back 3, 4 in PPR. He was running back 13 last year. He was top 10 in PPR, and that's mostly because he saw his largest volume of targets he's ever had in his career at 75, and he turned that into 60 catches, 440 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's the one thing you got going for Mixon that I like a lot over someone like J.K. Dobbins is he's going to be involved in this passing game because it's a pass-heavy volume offense. Again, they were 6th in passing yards and 2nd in passing touchdowns. So why wouldn't you want a piece of that in any fact? So moving on to the receivers that benefit off those numbers, you've got Jamar Chase, 3 overall, wide receiver number 2. He was wide receiver 12 last year. He didn't play a full season. He had his injury issues. I think it was a hip issue. That being said, the one number that jumps off the page that scares me a little bit is he had 134 targets. Massive. That's wide receiver 1 targets through the roof. 87 catches, low volume reception there. I don't like that in terms of going for my top guy. When you look at other people like Justin Jefferson and Cooper Kupp, their conversion rate is much higher.
Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams.
Yeah. So when you look at it and breaking it down into a percentage, he did have a catch percentage last year of 64.9. And so it was 1% higher than it was when he was a rookie, but the numbers were pretty much the same. I mean, it was 128 for 81 as a rookie, 134 for 87. His yards per reception went down and his touchdowns went down as well. Of course, he played 5 less games than he did his rookie season. So I think you would have seen massive. The fact that he had more targets in 5 less games from his rookie season tells you a lot, especially when you get no real change to T. Higgins numbers from the past 2 seasons. I think this guy is still worthy. He could finish wide receiver 1 overall, but he could also finish outside the top 5. It's just a matter of what he's able to do. His yards per target went down last year from his rookie season. That's another thing that jumped off the page at me. It was 7.8 yards per target last year. It was 11.4 the prior year. That's a significant number change.
Screen game a little bit more last year. And they've used it since he was a rookie, but they really heavily target it because it's effective. And here's the thing with Chase is that he's like Tyreek Hill, where he doesn't need a lot of volume because he has just massive upside in the home run ability, and he can take the slant or he can take the screen pass and take it to the house. His speed is undeniable. He catches the ball very, very well. but yeah, the targets, the split, and this is why we kind of talk about
64% is low. I mean, Justin Jefferson, for example, was just a hair under 70, and Cooper Kupp has had 70 all except his rookie year, over 70% catch percentage. Like,
because Cooper
so
Kupp's a freak.
that's what I'm saying. He had 76.5 in the games he played,
Well,
75 in his almost 2,000-yard season. So that's the one number that concerns me with Jamar Chase. If you're going to be taking him as your number one overall, like,
well, that's why he's my number 4.
if that,
You know,
yeah, that's
wide
why
receiver.
exactly.
And that's why this is exactly why I don't think he has even the chance to be the number 1 wide receiver overall at the end of the season, is when you have guys like, unless Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, and Cooper Kupp all get injured, there's no chance.
Even Devontae Adams too. I think even Devontae Adams, because his numbers are that big.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way he beats that out, because this is a true 1A 1B situation. You look at the splits between him and T. Higgins, and T. Higgins has a lot of targets.
Yeah, T. Higgins had 24 less targets, and he only had 12 less receptions.
Right.
And so he went for 4 less yards than he did. He had a bigger yards per target. He had a bigger yards per reception, only 2 less touchdowns. Now, that being said, T. Higgins obviously, I believe, played, I think, maybe a couple more games than him. Did he play every single game? I can't remember if he missed one. I thought yeah, I'll check it right now. But he played 16 games last year.
Yeah.
So he played 4 more games. But again, that his numbers are almost identical to 2021 in 14 games. Higgins in 3 years has averaged 109 targets every single year.
Yeah.
Like, and he's Mr. Consistency.
Well, we've talked about this too, is that why we like the value of Higgins more than Chase. It's not that we like the upside more, but the value of where you can get him is better for T. Higgins, because he's going to put up fairly similar numbers. Chase has the upside to do more with it, and we saw in his rookie year where he had the 13 touchdowns. Or was that his sophomore year?
It was a rookie year.
Rookie year. I think it 13 touchdowns. So
yeah.
I mean, that's right. Yeah, last year was his sophomore year. Yeah. So his rookie year, he had 13 touchdowns. So he has the upside there, of the touchdown ability. But I can't. Like, I'm not going to be in a position that I have to draft him, and even if I'm at the 1, 2, or 3 spot, I'm not taking him. So he's probably going to go in, probably the 5 to 8 range overall, and then T. Higgins will be sitting there at the end of the second round. Like,
I mean, you can make your argument that you can take Tyreek Hill over him. You could take Devontae Adams over him, although different quarterback situation for Adams. I think he'll still prevail. And Cooper Kupp over Jamar Chase. I don't know why every year there's somebody on somebody's bandwagon in the professional sense for fantasy football analysts. They want to jump on one guy and try and ride it to the finish line. And Chase has been on the tip of everybody's tongue when talking about who can go number 1 overall in PPR leagues. Nonstop. It's been Chase. Even though the rankings still say Jefferson, everybody's talking about Chase.
Even though he has 50 less receptions.
Yeah, and when you look at it too, you still have a third wide receiver there who plays like a wide receiver too, flex player for you, and that's Tyler Boyd. The guy had 59 catches, 776 yards, and 6 touchdowns. And even his numbers, yards per catch and yards per target, were better than Jamar Chase's as well last year. So that's the thing, that there's a lot of volume there. They're high volume passing offense. However, there's 3 viable options there.
There's more.
And I liked, you'll get, if you count the running back and the tight end and all that, but I'm just saying the 3 main wide receivers are all viable in any given play. Well, so, and then you get Irv Smith added to the offense. It's tough to project out Irv Smith. He's a talented NFL football player. The hard part is he can never stay healthy. He just can't stay healthy. His whole career has been injured. He has shining moments here and there. The Bengals do like their tight ends. Hayden Hurst had a boom year there. You had seasons prior to where Uzoma was a beast. He had multiple 3-touchdown games. So they're going to use him because the passing volume is going to be there. You want a piece of this offense. I'm not saying go draft Irv Smith, but Irv Smith is going to be one of those guys you could take a flyer on based on like the tight ends. If you fade tight end, this is a guy you could take as an offense that likes him.
Late round Irv Smith. Go for it.
But anything else to say? besides that for these wide receivers before we finish up
Yes.
with our last team?
I want to say this. I think that this is probably top to bottom as a wide receiver room. This is a top 2 wide receiver room in the league. Because we didn't even talk about Charlie Jones, Trenton Irwin, or the Princeton guy, Andre Isovias.
I don't think there's any reason to really talk about them unless you're going to talk about dynasty, because these 3 main guys are going to be on the field the whole time.
Right. But I think, well, you saw Trenton Irwin come in last year, and how many touchdowns did he have on a limited role? I mean, I'm just saying this is a very, very talented wide receiver room. So even if there were injuries to Chase, Boyd, Higgins, you have a lot of guys that are deep down. And this is, again, an offense that you want a piece of, like we just said.
Yeah.
So if there were an injury to one or multiple of these guys, this is how you have to think about the waiver wire, right? Is like, what kind of offenses do you want a piece of? This is one of those teams where if the injury happens to a starter, go and get the backup, because this offense.
Yeah, I've always said about that, about Boyd. If Boyd is not owned in your league to start the season out of the draft, or somebody drops in the first couple of weeks, if anything happens to Higgins or Chase, he should be number 1 priority, because every year that has happened, he comes out swinging the big stick. He's the guy who Burrow can trust, because Burrow's got a great rapport with Boyd.
It's the same thing we said about Chase Brown, and it's the same thing we'll say about Drew Sample, is that if anything happens to Irv Smith, go and get Drew Sample as a fill-in. Like any one of these backups, you should priority waiver if there's an injury to a star.
Well, that being said, let's move on to the Cleveland Browns, last team in the AFC North here. They finished the season 7-10. Obviously, they started off weak at the quarterback position. They knew that Deshaun Watson was coming in at the end of the season at some point, and they had to see what they got, and it was a lot of rust involved in that. You could hear it through the TV, but they have a 9.5 Vegas odd, which is pretty high, which tells you that we're high on the Browns offense, and so is Vegas. So they were 6th in rushing yards last year behind Nick Chubb, obviously, but they were 23rd in passing. I think they'll still be top 10 in rushing, and I think they'll move themselves up into the top 15 in passing, because Deshaun Watson's just a talented quarterback. I'm not saying he's going to be a top 5 guy, but he's been there before multiple times every year of his career pretty much. There's a chance he does it again. So he's ADP 79 overall, QB 9, so people like him as a top 10. Here's my thing with him. In 6 games, he did have 7 touchdowns, 5 picks. He did have 36 rushes for 175 and a touchdown. That was always been a good part of his game. He's not rushing like Jalen Hurts is or Josh Allen, but he still has a good piece of his game in the running game, especially in the red zone, finding his way in the end zone. I'm taking a chance on him here. If you miss any of the top guys, you've got him, you've got Tua in that range, that I'm willing to take a chance on one of those 2 guys, because their ceilings and potential and the offenses they're on, they're going to have a big play on there. I mean, you even said it to me prior to that, you're going to be keeping Watson, as a keeper in our league. And I think that's a great opportunity, especially where you have him so late, because you took a chance on him last year. So
what's under my robe?
Yeah. To me, that I like him, but this offense obviously has always run through Nick Chubb. ADP 14 overall, running back 6. We have him in our top 5 because the guy has gotten better year after year after year. He was running back 5 last year, 6 in PPR. He had over 300 rushing attempts last year for 1,500 yards. He has never finished a season below 5 yards per carry. That's why we love this guy. Nobody else can say that. He had 12 touchdowns. I expect that to be the same. He had 1 through the air. I believe he's going to do a little bit more than 27 receptions. I expect him to be closer towards 40, add to about 10 more receptions to his game this season. Should increase his numbers even more, which is why I could see him finishing top 3, top 4. Anything besides those 2 guys, I think the writing's on the walls for them. There's not much to really dive into besides the fact that we do like both these guys and we would draft them in our drafts.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is the argument that we made about Chubb the entire time, is this is the best offense he's been on in terms of talent. And this the best offense that he's had in terms of a passing game. And so I think that only helps him. And people want to say, oh, he's older. All right. But there's no Kareem Hunt there. And they're like, oh, well, Jerome Ford is there. Well, what do you think Jerome Ford is going to do? Cut into Nick Chubb's? Nick Chubb is the best pure running back in football. He's not going to cut into, even if he gets 20% of the touches, fine. Nick Chubb is efficient as hell with the ball. And again, he's not facing 8-man boxes anymore. You can't. You
No.
have to respect Deshaun Watson. You have to respect the receivers on the outside here. And there's no slouches. This is a really good we talked about this before. This is a really good receiving room. You know, Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Cedric Tillman. You have 4 legitimate options at receiver. All right. So, and Deshaun Watson can chuck the ball.
Well, look at Deshaun Watson at the end of the season in his QB finishes. Yeah. And I just want to bring up
when he started to figure it out and the rust came off, we saw the Deshaun Watson of old. And this is what we've been saying all offseason is he doesn't need to be the Deshaun Watson from 3 years ago. He just needs to be 80% of that. And this offense is going to be really, really good.
Yeah. And we're talking about weeks 17 and 18 last year. He finished off as QB8, QB6. At that point, Nick Chubb had a 100-yard game, 14 carries for 100 yards, and he had 12 carries for 77 in the final game of the season, the loss to Pittsburgh, both of which he had respectively a 7.4 yards per attempt and a 6.4 yards per attempt. So Chubb, even with Watson, is going to be even more successful, like you just said. Just look at those rushing numbers there when Watson is being successful. I mean, Chubb only finished RB14 in that Week 17 game when he had the 100 yards, but he finished RB2 in Week 18 with the 77 and what he did on 12 carries, because he also had 5 catches for 45 and a touchdown. So to me, that's where I see the value of those two guys. Let's move on to the receiving core. Amari Cooper, ADP 40 overall, wide receiver 17. He finished wide receiver 8. Just the news today, I know he's dealing with a little bit of an injury. He's back to individual drills as of yesterday, which is good. Keep an eye on his health there. But he was wide receiver 8 standard, 10 PPR. He had 1,160 yards, a 14-point yards per reception, and 9 touchdowns. Those wide receiver 1 numbers, obviously finishing the top 10. But then you've got Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, new additions, and then Donovan Peoples-Jones, Mr. Tried and True and reliable. So Elijah Moore is what they're coining in camp right now, a versatile weapon. They said that you could see him lining up in the backfield this season a little bit too as well, especially with no Kareem Hunt back there. Maybe some trickery, who knows? But he finished last year with 12 yards per catch, 1 touchdown, and only 37 receptions.
Don't look at the Jets numbers.
I was going to say, don't look at the numbers while he was with the Jets last year. Just look at the potential and where the Jets took him and what they know. And I think that's what you got to get. I think he's going to be an awesome wide receiver 2 for this team. And then you got Cedric Tillman coming in, who the year before last, before he had his injury and in Tennessee, he was
the best wide receiver in college football.
Exactly. And so Jalen Hyatt was that the following year for Tennessee. So when Tillman was hurt, I like Tillman here. I think he's a sneaky pick. It's a great dynasty pick, a great rookie draft pick, and it's a great late round pick because he could emerge as somebody that could start eating into on these 3 wide receiver sets outside of Donovan Peoples-Jones. And if he truly is what they tout him to be, he could give Moore a run for his money. But people love Elijah Moore. Even his was it Newsome, their D-back, was talking about how he is something special, that he's had difficulty in camp covering him because he's like sees a lot out of him that you don't see from other wide receivers. So I want to piece this offense.
Elijah Moore is extremely talented. And I just said the same thing about Denzel Mims, and he just got traded. And I know it doesn't look like anything on the surface because it's like, oh, well, what has he done his entire career? And what has Elijah Moore done his entire career? You have to consider that the Jets' passing offense has been absolutely awful. So you could have had Justin Jefferson there, and he would have had crap numbers. So because the quarterback play was terrible. And that's why I'm so excited about Garrett Wilson. We'll talk about him when we do the Jets, is because you look at the numbers that he actually put up in a terrible passing offense, and you have some confidence that when you have a legit thrower with the football with Aaron Rodgers, that he can actually perform. Going back to Elijah Moore, and you watch his game tape, and he's so talented. He gets open all the time, and he catches the ball very well, and he can do things after the catch. But they just couldn't get him the ball. I mean, what was he getting? Like zero targets? He's out there for 86% of the snaps and getting 0 targets from Zach Wilson?
Yeah, it was a quarterback problem, not an Elijah Moore problem last year.
Right.
Let's
And
be honest.
I'll say this about Cedric Tillman too, is I think he's going to get a lot more playing time, and I think he can overtake Donovan Peoples-Jones as a number 3 there. And I've said this about Elijah Moore, is they can move him around the entire offense. I've been saying this since he went to the Browns, is he can play
Yeah, he's
every
fantastic.
position. And so if you have Donovan Peoples-Jones on the outside, he can be in 2 wide receiver sets on the outside. He could be in 3 wide receiver sets in the slot. So Peoples-Jones comes in on the outside with Amari Cooper. And Amari Cooper's had some dings on, nothing serious in the last couple of years, but he's had some minor injuries. He's dealing with a tweaked injury right now. And so Tillman could step up into that number 3 role very easily, and especially if there's an injury of any sort. Cedric Tillman is a guy in the dynasty league that you should absolutely draft. He's a fantastic receiver. I want to, and even with like David Njoku, we'll get into the tight ends here. Insert clip here on my tight end on that argument. But I'll ask you this: is what wide receiver do you like the best at their value here? Because it's really hard for me, because I like Amari Cooper at his value a lot. I like Elijah Moore at his value a lot.
Yeah,
Donovan Peoples-Jones is essentially going to be free. Tillman's going to be free. Like,
I like Amari Cooper, and this is the only reason why. Because when you look at the running backs around Amari Cooper, you're getting a running back 2 at that spot at 40th overall. But you have a chance to draft a wide receiver 1 in terms of finish. I mean, he finished wide receiver 8, and he's done it before in his career too. I like that with the quarterback upgrade, because he did wide receiver 8 last year without a full season with Deshaun Watson. So that just says what type of receiver Cooper is. And I want to grab him because he's lower on the board than I think he should be. For a team, for the Vegas putting a 9.5 odds on the Browns for wins, but having everybody's drafting Cooper as wide receiver 17. To me, that's where I'm going to get the value, because you look at the people that are going ahead of him. You've got Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, Chris Olave, Devonta Smith, T. Higgins. So T. Higgins and Devonta Smith are pretty much 1Bs to their team. Well, Amari Cooper's the 1A. Amari Cooper's going to outdo Deebo Samuel. He'll be on par with DK Metcalf, maybe a little bit better. I'm just saying the chance for him to finish in the top 10 again is high. And if you can do that, and you're getting him in the 4th round, that's probably the best value you could find there, because he's going to finish with 2nd round numbers, and you don't have to pay for a 2nd round wide receiver. So, but I do like Elijah Moore. I think, 47 overall, and who's around him, I think you've got a lot of opportunities. Or sorry, no, 47 wide receivers, 114 overall.
Yeah.
And you're looking at Beckham and Juju Smith-Schuster, Quentin Johnston. I think people are sleeping on him there. You've got wide receiver 2s and wide receiver 3s around him that are not proven. And you've got Elijah Moore, who has an opportunity to be a solid wide receiver 2 in this offense. I just think Cooper's the best value, period. But I do love Tillman. I would like to take a chance on him. And then David Njoku, let's finish up this whole Browns chat. And the fact is, Njoku finished last year as tight end 13. He's 97th overall. It's tight end 10, so he's a top 10 tight end. I've got him in my top 10 tight ends as well, because I think he's still a freak athlete. They drafted him for that reason. I think if you look at the history of Deshaun Watson, he loves his tight ends. He loved them in Houston. He used Njoku here last year. And Njoku became kind of the shining star outside of Amari Cooper last year. He had 58 catches for 628, 4 touchdowns with a 10.8 yards per reception. The stat that really, really excites me about Njoku is he was the number 2 tight end in terms of red zone targets last year. And I could see that happening again this year, because he's just a freak big body athlete. And he's the one guy that's going to be on this Browns offense that's going to be able to go down for contested catches, corner fades, and quick pop passes over the middle against those guys. He's a beast.
I agree. Like, I think that he is a great red zone target. The issue with Njoku, and this is, again, any tight end outside the top 4, is volume. And with the pass catchers that are on this team, I just don't trust the volume there. He's a guy that if I fade tight end and I don't get one of those top guys, I absolutely want Njoku. But I can, again, make the same argument about any of those guys there. The Hunter Henry.
Yeah, Freiermuth is right with him and everything. Again, I'm not saying it. I just like the the threat he is in the red zone for touchdown potential. That being said, he's never had over 4 in his career, but I like the threat there.
Yeah.
I mean, he had 80 targets last year. It was reminiscent of his 2018, his sophomore season, where he had 88 targets, pretty much finished the same amount of yardage. Everything was pretty much the same across the board. So the biggest difference between him and a lot of other tight ends that you're drafting around him is his home run ability. His athleticism and his speed gives him a chance to have these 70-yard touchdowns, these 60, and 40-yard touchdown plays, whereas some of the other guys aren't going to have the yards after catch that he has and the broken tackles that he's going to get. But you're right. Volume is the crutch for David Njoku and a lot of tight ends outside of those top 4. So
yeah, I want to bring up one more thing. I just kind of want to ask you, because we kind of skipped over this, and I had one more point on Nick Chubb. Is we kind of talked about it before we got on camera too. Is like, if you're at that number 5 spot, number 6 spot, where would you? What's the highest you would take Nick Chubb?
So I'm going to lay out my draft plan here, and don't use it against me. No, I'm not going to be outside the top 3 anyway. If I'm drafting four spot on. If I'm drafting at number 4, that's probably a spot where I take a chance on Nick Chubb, because I want a tried and true running back at number 4. 4, 5, 6 is the spot I target him. But I also, to me, it's a coin flip at that spot for Nick Chubb or Travis Kelce. Because to me, that's where I just have to decide, do I want to get the number 1 guy in his position, or do I want a guy that could finish top 3 again? But I know week to week is going to have steady Eddie numbers, because not every running back is going to give you that. And that's Nick Chubb. That's why I like him there. So I'd probably say 5, 6 is where I'd be taking him.
In almost every mock draft that we've done or I've seen done, Nick Chubb is slipping to the 2nd round, and I vomit almost every time.
Like, didn't he last year too? Pretty sure he did last year for. So
no, he was drafted in the 1st round last year in our draft.
Okay.
People, stop drafting Bijan Robinson over this guy. Stop. Like, Nick Chubb, end of season, is going to have way more fantasy points than Bijan is. And all the clip that you saw with Bijan yesterday, burning a backup linebacker's ankles, like, stop it. Stop it, people. Nick Chubb is tried and true every year, and this is going to be the best offense he's ever been in. And look at the numbers.
He's the most pure running back in the NFL.
He is the most
pure running back in the NFL.
And he'll score touchdowns even if his team loses. If they're up by 2 scores with 2 minutes left, he's not going to take a knee at the 1. He's going to get in there.
Yeah.
And then he's going to allow the Jets to come back and beat you.
That's where I take him. I take him at the 5, 6 for sure. Because to me, 4 is like that spot, even PPR, non-PPR, or standard. At the 4 spot is a sneaky play to pick Travis Kelce. Because you just set the tone, and you set the people starting to panic to try and get this tight end, because that's another guy that keeps slipping in drafts that I've seen is Travis Kelce. Some people want to get him in the 1st round, and other people want to fade him to go for these running backs and wide receivers. Then all of a sudden, somebody in the 2nd round's got a Christmas early. So that's it for the Browns. That's it for our AFC North. Our next episode will be hitting the NFC North, so keep an eye out for that. Again, like and subscribe and hit that notification button so you can see when we do drop the NFC North episode. Thanks for tuning in, all.